right, I heard tell, and I'm thrilled to once again talk to a guy who's a regular on the program, and we're happy and thrilled he is. Michael Siegel, sir. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Hope your family had a great holiday season. Everybody's doing their end of year review thing, and something that's in your wheelhouse. It has been a huge, huge year for space and space travel and astronomy and astrophysics. And you look a bit like a Renaissance painting with the halo behind your head, but tell folks what's behind you because that's kind of a really big deal in space circles. It's something that's been a long time in the making. And on Christmas Day, while everybody else was busy reveling, it finally got up, as they say in your line of work. So tell us all about it.
So what's behind me is the James Webb Space Telescope while it was being worked on down at Goddard Space Flight Center. So this is NASA's next great observatory. It's a 6.5 meter, that's 21 feet wide, mirror made of 18 hexagons that can be reconfigured to focus. And so this was proposed 25 years ago as the next generation space telescope as a sort of successor to Hubble. So for long that time, it's been in development. It's become kind of infamous because it ran way behind schedule and over budget. Originally, they said 2007 launch and $500 million. I don't think anyone thought that was realistic. I'm not sure what cost model they were using at that point, but by 2010, we were in a closer ballpark of where it was going to end up. But after years and years of delays, it finally did launch from French Guiana this weekend and successfully attained orbit and departed from the launch vehicle, deployed its solar panels, and just yesterday, the high gain antenna came online. And so the next few weeks are going to be very tense. It's going to slowly move out to the Lagrange 2 point. That's a point that's about 1.5 million miles further out from the Earth, than from the sun. And so that's going to allow it to maintain a certain alignment, keep its alignment pointed at the sun. What it has is this massive sun shield that will protect it from the solar heat because it works in the infrared. So you want the telescope to be as cold as possible. You want it to be about 50 degrees Kelvin, very, very cold. And so it's going to deploy this massive sun shield, and that L2 point will keep it oriented so that sun shield is pointed at the sun without using any fuel. And so that's going to be a tense couple of weeks. It's going to deploy that sun shield. When they were designing it and developing it, they did have a rip in the sun shield during one deployment. And so that's going to be a very nervous time. Anytime you have a moving part on a spacecraft, it's nervous. Then the telescope will unfold. It'll move to L2. And if everything goes right, within about 6 months, we'll start seeing the first light images from her.
Now, when we do science fiction, and you do these great videos, by the way, on YouTube, you need to subscribe to his channel, where you explain science fiction and talk through them, both as a science fiction fan and as a scientist, and kind of what would work, what wouldn't work, what's fantasy. In science fiction, those are just kind of throwaway cut shots and filler of something deploying or something launching or something positioning or put us in orbit, number one, or that stuff's all throwaway. But in your line of work, that's actually the really, really hard and technical part, isn't it?
Yeah, this is something that NASA plans to the nth degree because you only get one chance. And you can't send, even if the shuttle program were still active, this is going out to the Lagrange point. We don't have any spacecraft that can go up there and rendezvous with it. There are contingency plans that we could send a robotic mission out to service it if it became necessary, but there's been nothing built for that. So it's pretty much on its own. So you plan these things to the nth degree. I remember talking to one of the scientists who worked on JWST about how what they did was they got a giant piece of fabric and went in a big room with a whole bunch of them and spent weeks sort of unfolding it by hand to see what technique was the most efficient and was the least risky in terms of damaging the sun shield. So that is something that they did a lot of. Another thing that happened with this mission was one of the things you do is vibration testing. You put the spacecraft on a table and you shake the heck out of it. And because it's going to be launched, it's going to be on the top of a rocket. So you want to make sure it's going to stay intact. There have been incidents where during a launch, something broke or came free, and they had a whole bunch of screws fall out when they did the vibration testing. So that caused a delay. They had to go back and fix those all. And, on the one hand, it's embarrassing that happened. On the other hand, it would have been way more embarrassing if it had happened on launch. Another thing they do is thermal vac. You put it into a vacuum chamber, bring it down to space temperatures to make sure nothing's going to outgas or break. Another thing to simulate launch, there's a room down at Goddard which has the biggest subwoofer you've ever seen in your life that just blasts noise at these spacecraft to make sure that the sound isn't going to damage them. And so there is an enormous amount of testing you do. The mission I work on, Swift, one of the reasons it's so successful is that my predecessor, they actually went down to Goddard while the spacecraft was there, pulled out all the filters and put them in with a different glue, because we discovered that the cement had outgassed on orbit that they were planning to use, and contaminated the chamber, so you didn't get as good images. And so that was something that they fixed before launch, and one of the reasons it's been so successful. So there's the amount of preparation you do is enormous. And we tend to compress it. Like the other thing that happened this year was a Mars rover. All its moves are planned well in advance. It proceeds very slowly because it takes 15, 30 minutes, a couple of hours for those images to get back from you, so that if the spacecraft goes into a ditch, you don't find out for a while. So you want to move very slowly, see what is going on, have a chance to react and give it new instructions and so forth. So these are very careful, very well-planned things that we do in space, because as I said, you only get one chance to do it right.
Talk about the scale we're dealing with here, because I think one thing that really throws everybody off, and I ask you this, when we're just talking all the time, it's like, put a scale on it. Let me get something I can get my brain around. We're talking about something like you just said, the Lagrange point. We can't send a rescue aircraft to the Lagrange point. Well, in space terms, that's pretty close. That's like going down the street in space terms, but we can't even put a spacecraft over there on anything. It'd probably take us 10 years to figure out some way to get a spacecraft to it. Talk about the scale of these things, because we have low Earth orbit, upper Earth orbit. You're talking about the Lagrange point. You're talking about something going to Mars, and we can't even get the message for 15 or 20 minutes. Just talk scale for a minute, because it seems really small in one way, but then when you start looking at it, it's like, man, this stuff's big.
So yeah, as you go up into space, about 100 kilometers or 60 miles up, you have what we call the Kármán line. That's where the atmosphere sort of drops off, and that's referred to as the edge of space. That's where Blue Origin and places like that have been going. You can get that on a suborbital where you launch from Texas and you land in Texas. And so that's where sort of space begins. Above that, out to maybe, 1,200 kilometers or so, or 2,000 kilometers, 1,200 miles, you have what we call low Earth orbit. And that's where we put a lot of things. That's where Hubble is. That's where the ISS is. That's where most of our spacecraft are. That's where you have sort of the minimum stable orbit that's going to last for a while. You still have some atmosphere and some atmospheric drag. Things in LEO will slowly drift in and eventually re-enter the atmosphere. And that will depend on their orbit and the activity of the sun. The sun makes the atmosphere swell out, which can increase the drag and make them come in quicker. Beyond that, then you get out to maybe 26,000 kilometers, 26,000 miles, 40,000 kilometers. That's geostationary orbit, where the orbital period matches how fast the Earth rotates. That's where we put up a lot of satellites that do communications and so forth. Then you at 250,000 miles, you have the moon. And then at 1.5 million, you have where this Lagrange point is. And then you're talking tens of millions or hundreds of millions of miles when you get to planets, 90 million miles to the sun, and then trillions of miles to the nearest star. So the scales go up very, very fast. If you go onto YouTube, you can find these videos called Powers of 10. There was one made maybe 50 years ago that's in black and white. There's another one the Smithsonian remade about 20 years ago that sort of expand out from Earth, increasing in powers of 10, and then go into atoms. And that can give you a nice sense of just how enormous the universe is and how small these things are, even though they're big achievements for us.
Yeah, we're talking to Michael Siegel, our resident space ace and expert in all things scientific and a very smart guy. You mentioned this thing's been 20 some years in the making. I also don't think people understand the lag time on this thing. Now, it's been a little bit more because things like SpaceX, people paid attention to it, but they don't understand that's kind of an accelerated time frame. I remember when we were going to do the Artemis stuff, we were going to do Apollo replacements, we were going to do shuttle replacements. The shuttle took quite a while to kind of get up and get online, and then when it went away, all of a sudden there was nothing, and people are like, well, wait a minute, why is it taking 10-15 years? Discuss that lag time, though, from the scientist and the astronomer and actually working in the space program side of it. If this is 20 years, you should already know what's 20 years from now, but we really don't in most cases, do we?
With something as massive as JWST, that does take a long time. There are a variety of reasons why it takes so long. One of them is you're developing new technology, and it takes time to develop that technology. You have to test it. Nowadays, we have, technology can be tested on rocket flight, small rocket flights, what we call sounding rockets, or balloon flights even. And so there's an enormous development time because you are pushing the technological edge. I think that NASA is trying to focus more on things that can be done on an accelerated cycle. I don't think they see JWST as necessarily the model for how we should do things, but it does, again, when you're pushing the technological edge, it can take time like that.
I'm talking to Michael Siegel on Heard Tell, a regular. We hope he continues to be a regular, and we'll continue to talk space, the year that was in space, right after this. Now let me see you go off like a bomb. Back to Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson, joined with our good friend Michael Siegel. Always thrilled to talk a little space with him and the year that was in space. You've been talking about the James Webb Telescope that just went up. We see all the SpaceX stuff. We have the Blue Origin stuff, Virgin Galactic, which is going to be kind of a sightseeing thing. It looks like SpaceX is actually, putting stuff into orbit and passengers and things like this. Is something like the Space Telescope, is there a differentiation here? Because this more research driven stuff that maybe doesn't have the commercial into it that the, SpaceX or the Virgin or the Blue Origin has. Is this the argument of why this can't all be privatized? We still need a NASA. We still need a public-private partnership. Is this a good argument for it, or is this just kind of status quo for that?
I think it's a good argument for it. NASA brings along a certain amount of expertise and scale for big projects like JWST that private industry would probably not be able to bring. But we'll see. I mean, Elon Musk has talked about putting telescopes in space in response to complaints about the Starlink satellite obscuring the views from Earth. We'll see if anything comes of that and whether he can do it on a faster timescale and cheaper than NASA can. But there is a certain weight that needs to be brought to these programs that I think NASA needs to bring. When you're talking about something, I mean, even a relatively small space telescope is a collaboration of several countries, and the Europeans contributed about, I think it's about 700 million euros to the JWST program. You're talking about collaborations between multiple institutions and universities, thousands of scientists and engineers and so forth. JWST is amazingly complex. I mean, HST is amazingly complex. And so what they are doing in SpaceX, as awesome as it is still relatively simple compared to something like this. Mars rovers are amazingly complex. All the satellites that we put up, these are very complex machines compared to a rocket. And so having, improvements in rocketry and cutting into the cost of that, often the launch is one of the most expensive parts of these things. That can help, but I think with something like this kind of a massive program, this is something where having a private-public partnership is a little more appropriate than a purely private thing.
Talking space with Michael Siegel, the year that it was in 2021. The other part of that is something that you know because it's what you spend a good bit of your time doing, but the general public doesn't realize the continuing infrastructure, the tracking, the data collection. You're talking, you're hoping to get, I'm assuming, probably what, 10, 20 years out of this piece of equipment. That's a lot of infrastructure. That's a lot of support. Uh, Talk about what goes into these things. It's great that it got up and we're all excited about that. But now this is actually when the work actually starts, and you have to maintain this thing and you have to use the data. Talk about the support structure now that it's up there, what's going to go on, because we've heard about Hubble for 25 years, whatever it's been now. People don't realize there's a lot that goes into these things, and there's going to be even more that goes into this new JD. I can't even do the acronym. What is it now? James Webb JWTS.
Yep.
There you go. I
Uh,
got it.
yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. The amount of ground support that has to be done to continue these operations is pretty intense. What I do is support for the Swift mission. And we have 3 institutions that do most of that support, actually 4. And probably even at this stage, late in the mission, we've been up 17 years, at least a dozen people who are doing support for science and so forth. So, I mean, you have to, first of all, bring the instruments online. That's going to take a while. Then you have to calibrate the instruments, figure out how to correct the images, how to process the data so that it makes sense. You just get a certain, let's say you look at a star and you measure a certain brightness. Well, that's for the telescope. You need to know what that is on an abstract scale, on an absolute scale. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. The spacecraft is going to need maintenance, systems that need to be monitored. If something goes wrong, that needs to be fixed. If the systems are going to change, the spacecraft is going to lose sensitivity. The instruments are going to lose sensitivity over time. That needs to be accounted for. You also need a team of people. This tool will put the data, make the data available to the public, and are available to other scientists who need help with their data. Hey, I don't understand why this image looks this way. Can you help me? And so forth. So there's a huge amount of infrastructure. My first job out of graduate school was at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore. And that is a pretty massive building filled with a mix of people who are engineers who maintain the spacecraft, data scientists, planners. You have to plan the spacecraft very exquisitely to make sure you're getting lots of data and that you're not doing anything that's going to be endangered. You're keeping the solar panels aligned so that it's powered up. In this case, not interfering with the sun shield. These are very complex operations to do. And so they have probably, I don't know the actual employment numbers, but I would guess dozens to hundreds of people on the ground who are going to be supporting this, at
Yeah.
least at initial stages.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a massive undertaking. It really is we've kind of take it for granted in modern technology, but this really is one of those great scientific achievements when you get into breaking it down. All right, it's the end of the year. You're our science guy. Everybody has to do their best of, or top whatever, top 3, top 5, top 10. There was a lot of space news this year. Obviously, the James Webb Telescope we're talking about. We've talked about SpaceX. We put Shatner in space. Give me your top 2 or 3 things this year in order. What was the biggest deals in space travel, space exploration for the year of our Lord 2021?
I think landing the Perseverance rover on Mars was a big deal. This was the second time we've used that technique to land, and it's launched a little hovercraft and so forth. It's getting some amazing information. I think probably within the next decade, we may have a very definitive answer on whether there was very primitive life or the building blocks of life on Mars. We're getting very close to that answer. So that was a huge story. And the private spacecraft, I think, was a big deal. I know a lot of people think of them as stunts and, worry about the rich taking over space. I'm less worried about that because, as I said, going into space is a lot more complex than just launching a rocket. But I think that brought a lot of the attention it brought, the excitement it brought to a lot of people, I think was very good. Obviously, James Webb. I mean, if you broaden it to all of science, obviously the pandemic and the vaccine development, that was probably the biggest story of the year, I think, in terms of science. But 2021 has been a very good year for science, a very good year for space. And we've had a lot of really great breakthroughs. I write, every 2 weeks about what's been going on in science, and I have not lacked for things to write about. even putting aside the pandemic, there's been just so many breakthroughs and discoveries this year. It's been incredible.
Yeah, it really has. Okay, the modern age we live in, you are self-aware. It's one of the things that make you a great writer and a good friend and somebody we love to talk to. So we just got to go ahead and bring it up. How is the James Webb Space Telescope going to be memed? We know Hubble makes appearances. There are gifts that you can pull up for it of I don't care, even if I use the Hubble Space Telescope, I can't find how much I don't care. So how is the James Webb Telescope over the next 10, 12 years? How's it going to become a meme or a joke, do you think? How would you give me some astronomy humor here?
I'd have to think about that. Probably one of the things I think a lot of the memes may center around what JWST is doing. It's looking into the infrared. It's looking at the some of the most distant and faintest things we can find. It's looking at what we call the dark ages, where we are between the cosmic microwave background, which we can see in the radio, and the first galaxies that we can see in the optical. That's the area it's filling in where the first galaxies form. So I would say maybe a joke in that line would be, people have been debating this so long that you need JWST to see when the debate began. That's kind of
Nerd.
lame. I have to think of something better.
Good enough, man. No, they'll figure out some way to do it. It's an amazing piece of technology, and just as your friend and your editor, I've appreciated you have done yeoman's work, and I don't just say that as a joke. You have done an amazing job at ordinary-times.com this year, putting the COVID stuff together, the science stuff. You're always there when we need you. So just on a personal level, thank you. And we hope you have a very, very good and productive 2022. And we hope you will continue to be with us to explain the chaos on the science side of it, because you are a scientist, which them's the rules. We have to believe you now, right?
Yeah, especially my opinions on science fiction movies. You have to accept that. You
Yeah.
can't disagree.
I do hope you'll do more of those, because that's badly needed. And you know, the fun thing about that is it really is, if you can do it that way, it makes for a fun gateway into the more serious science too. So
Well,
good
I
product.
enjoy doing it because I love movies and TV and science fiction, and even when there's a flight of fancy, I like, to talk about it, and where this intersects with real science. And I mean, there are other people who have done this, but it's just something I enjoy doing.
Yeah, and we enjoy reading it, and we enjoy watching it on YouTube. Tell folks where they can find you, your YouTube channel, your Twitter, and all the things you have going on, my friend.
If you just look at Michael Siegel Astronomy on YouTube, you'll probably find me. It's also linked on my Twitter account, which is HAL_RTFLC, from an old website. And if you go to ordinarytimes.com and click on my name, you'll find Twitter there. So everything flows through Ordinary Times.
Yep, and we are proud to have you, and we appreciate you greatly. If I don't talk to you before then, you have yourself a wonderful new year, you and your family, my friend.
You too.
Thanks for being with us on Hurtel.
All right.
We'll be back.